Once again, good evening, everyone. You're listening to Red Pill 78. As always, I am Zak, the Corruption Detector, and this is another edition of Red Pill News. I hope everyone's having a lovely day, that you've had a marvelous afternoon as well, and that you got a chance to check out Occam's Razor from earlier today. If you didn't, no big deal. We've got several interesting stories we're going to be going over right now. Now, first of all, President Trump laid down some major bombs last night with Laura Ingraham when he appeared on her program for an interview. First of all, talking about the leaders in the shadows, the people controlling the mayhem and carnage you see on American streets right now. We've also got a very interesting announcement from Homeland Security Chief Chad Wolf, who has confirmed a probe into the funding of those rioters and those people in the shadows, because it looks like some highly organized violent operators are working behind the scenes to ensure that Americans are afraid to go out on the streets. President Trump has even made the statement that perhaps a terror attack was thwarted. We also have the latest numbers on federal arrests and charges from the DOJ provided by Catherine Herridge, and President Trump said that he thinks the press is actually fueling the riots. We also have a breaking bit of information. President Trump and his administration providing aid to Kenosha, Wisconsin. He and his team are there as we speak, and it would appear that Oregon sheriff's deputies are in all-out revolt against Governor Kate Brown. They are refusing to follow her orders and be deployed. And we have new information from the Democrat operative who has blown the whistle on massive mail-in voter fraud and the operation the Democrats used to steal elections. And finally, it looks like the State Department is set to release memos detailing illegal social media monitoring of American citizens. So please, everyone, sit back, relax, grab your popcorn, and we'll be right back after a brief word from our sponsor. Off-the-grid living is a trend that's been gaining popularity for years, and now with the rise in alternative energy sources, it's becoming extremely easy for preppers to live without having to use municipal power. One of the ways you can jumpstart your journey to off-the-grid living is with one of the solar water heaters by Prepper's Peak. The solar water heater doesn't require any batteries because it's powered entirely by the built-in solar panels on the heater itself. It allows you to heat and boil water from virtually anywhere. Not only that, but it's extremely compact and portable, weighing in at only 2.6 pounds, so you'll hardly notice it along with all your other gear. Now when I want hot water and I'm camping, I don't need to go through the backbreaking work of trying to start a fire. I don't have to deal with the hassle of gathering dry wood. Imagine boiling water with no flame, no smoke, and no noise. This month I've partnered with Prepper's Peak to give my audience 50% off their very own solar water heater, plus express rush shipping. Go to solarwaterheater.com, or you can click the link in the video description or the pinned comment below and order yours today. And remember, when you support my sponsors, you support this channel. All right, guys, thanks for sticking around. First of all, today, in a move that can only be described as huge. Last night, with Laura Ingraham, President Trump stated that leftist leaders in the dark shadows are running the riots and chaos, and that violent leftists were flown in to disrupt. That's right. They intercepted a plane load of people who were planning what can only be described as a terror attack. Now, President Trump joined Laura Ingraham last night for a quite lengthy interview, and only part one airing last night. During the interview, President Trump warned about the leaders of the far-left chaos in the streets of America who are, quote-unquote, hiding in the dark shadows. Now, this makes a lot of sense to anybody who watches this show or has been following what's happening here in America. At best, every one of these peaceful protests have leaders whose roles are decided, who are chosen, and fake medics are given gear, and their attacks appear to be highly coordinated. President Trump even described the Black Bloc rioters as flying into Washington, D.C. to disrupt the RNC and cause mayhem in the streets, which of course they did. Vernon Jones was attacked, Rand Paul was attacked, and many other attendees to the RNC also had threats against their lives made in the streets of Washington, D.C. Senator Rand Paul claimed that the rioters were being paid after he and his wife were attacked leaving that event, and Attorney General Bill Barr himself said on Monday that highly organized operators were behind the riots in several U.S. cities. Now, in a transcript from the interview, Laura Ingraham asked, "Who do you think is pulling Biden's strings? Is it former Obama officials?" And President Trump said, "People you've never heard of." Now, let's go ahead and listen to the clip itself.
He's not controlling anything.
Who do you think is pulling Biden's strings? Is it former Obama
people
officials?
that you've never heard of, people that are in the dark shadows, people that...
What does that mean? That sounds like conspiracy theory, dark shadows.
No,
what is that?
People that you haven't heard of. They're people that are on the streets. They're people that are controlling the streets. We had somebody get on a plane from a certain city this weekend, and in the plane, it was almost completely loaded with thugs wearing these dark uniforms, black uniforms with gear and this and that. They're on a plane.
Where's this?
I'll tell you sometime, but it's under investigation right now. But they came from a certain city, and this person was coming to the Republican National Convention. And there were like 7 people on the plane like this person, and then a lot of people were on the plane to do big damage. They were coming
planning for Washington.
Yeah, this is all happening.
But the money is coming from somewhere.
Money is coming
how can it be tracked?
From some very stupid rich people that have no idea that if their thing ever succeeded, which it won't, they will be thrown to the wolves like you.
President Trump is absolutely right. These rich people that are walking in the shadows, sending money to these organizations so that they can keep these protests going, are very stupid. Even if they are successful, they will be the next on the list for these radicals to come for. They are not going to be immune simply because they send in a check, simply because they hold up a sign that says we support BLM. It doesn't matter what they say they believe. They are part of the bourgeoisie, and the people who are in the streets rioting want the power for themselves. They are a Marxist organization. Their goals are stated as such on their own website, and the people behind all of this are going to be next on the list. Now let's next take a look at the statement from DHS Secretary Chad Wolf. Now, I think everybody watching the show has come to realize that President Trump doesn't just make baseless statements. If President Trump is saying that they know who is behind the payments going to these organizations, then that means the investigations are already taking place, and that has been confirmed by Acting Homeland Security Chief Chad Wolf. Now, he confirmed that an investigation is underway into the funding of the rioting taking place amid racial justice protests and unrest nationwide, and he sent a letter to Portland Mayor urging him to request federal assistance so that the DHS can go in and quell the violence. He said, "This is something I have talked to AG Barr personally about," Wolf told Fox News' Tucker Carlson just last night, saying the department is focused on targeting and investigating the head of these organizations and the individuals that are paying for these individuals to move across the country. What we know, Tucker, is that we have seen groups and individuals move from Portland to other parts of the country. Now, he then told the story about the RNC member who saw protesters on the plane to D.C. that President Trump just mentioned in our last segment, and then referred to the letter that he sent to Mayor Ted Wheeler in an effort to quell the unrest taking place in Portland. He asked Mayor Ted Wheeler to prioritize public safety by requesting the federal assistance so that his agents could quell the violence. He said, "We are standing by to support Portland." And at the same time, President Trump has made it abundantly clear that there will come a point when state and local officials fail to protect its citizens from violence. The federal government will have no choice but to protect our American citizens. Now, I think myself and many other people would argue that the mayor of Portland and the governor of Oregon have already gotten to that point. They have clearly failed to protect the citizens of the city and the state. Now, Wolf further explained in the letter that local law enforcement have just made 255 arrests and declared 23 riots and unlawful assemblies since July 31st. And despite this, Ted Wheeler has stood by passively, arguing that the nightly violence will ultimately burn out, while the evidence demonstrates otherwise. Now, with President Trump's statements about the stupid rich people that are funding the violence and the unrest, and Chad Wolf's statement that they are actively investigating the sources of those fundings, it's only a matter of time before these people are brought to justice. Now, with the final night of the Republican National Convention last Thursday, this is where the group of violent protesters were found to be on a plane to Washington, D.C. And the way they found out about it is because an attendee of the RNC actually flew on the same plane plane to the event. Now, President Trump has not identified the city. They have not identified the RNC attendee, but as he said in that interview with Laura, hopefully he's going to be able to tell us sometime. The horrifying footage of Senator Rand Paul and his wife Kelly being confronted by dozens of protesters as they tried to walk back to their hotel after the speech is something that will be indelibly burned into the minds of American citizens. This is the future of America if Joe Biden and the Democrats are voted in November. Now, with D.C. Metro Police struggling to hold back the angry mob, one has to ask the question, where was the protection for the attendees of the Republican National Convention? And the answer is that Muriel Bowser, the mayor of Washington, D.C., more than likely held back additional forces from being brought in to provide that protection. It has been known for quite some time that angry groups of mobs were planning to siege the White House and to siege the RNC. And you can bet that with this attack on Rand Paul and others attending the RNC, the investigations against the people funding these violent protests are going to begin in earnest. And with people like Chad Wolf and Attorney General Barr looking at it with a very close eye, very soon, I think we're going to see some indictments for people who have been fueling this unrest for so many months. Now, last week, Attorney General Barr also made a statement regarding the unrest in these Democrat-led cities, places like Minneapolis, New York, Chicago, Seattle, Portland, and now, unfortunately, Kenosha, Wisconsin. But he said, as the Department of Justice explained in our briefing, federal officers in Portland, like law enforcement in other parts of the country, have confronted aggressive mob violence. Behind the veil of protests, highly organized, violent operators have carried out direct attacks on federal personnel and property, particularly the federal courthouse in Portland. Shielded by the crowds, which make it difficult for law enforcement to detect or reach them, violent opportunists in Portland have attacked the courthouse and federal officers with explosives, lasers, projectiles, and other dangerous devices. In some cases, purported journalists or legal observers have provided cover for the violent offenders. In others, individuals wearing supposed press badges have themselves attacked law enforcement or trespassed onto federal property. More than 200 federal officers have been injured in Portland alone. Now, the idea that in Portland alone, nearly 200 federal officers have been injured is just a staggering figure. Now, with the recent riots in Kenosha, it's provided more evidence that this is the case. The Kenosha Police Department said itself on Sunday that officers arrested 175 people during a week of civil unrest that followed the police shooting of Jacob Blake, and 102 of those people taken into custody listed addresses outside of Kenosha. This clearly shows that people are traveling from point A to point B with the express intention of engaging in violent insurrection against the United States. The arrests included people from 44 different cities, the police department said. 69 people were arrested for curfew violations, and 34 more were arrested for curfew violations in addition to other charges ranging from carrying concealed weapons, burglary, and possession of controlled substances. Now, for months now, we have seen the footage of violent attacks, not only against people who are trying to protect the city, like federal officers and local officers, but also average, everyday people being attacked by these violent mobs. And it culminated recently in the terrible incidents that took place in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Next, let's take a look at a tweet from Catherine Herridge, which includes updated information from the Department of Justice on the number of people who have been arrested or imprisoned. Now, Carrie Kupek herself, a spokesperson for the DOJ, said that they were investigating this coordinated criminal activity, stating it is not First Amendment activity and violence related to the riots, destruction of federal property, and violence against law enforcement officials. Now, from the DOJ, the latest numbers on federal arrests plus charges related to the rioting and civil unrest include, on a national scale, 300 people, with 302 people charged, and in Portland alone, 100 arrests and 76 people charged. Interesting, you've got 2 more people charged who have not been arrested yet. I wonder if those 2 people are some of the rich and stupid who are funding the violent attacks taking place in our American cities run by Democrats. As I mentioned, with Kenosha, Wisconsin being the latest city to culminate in terrible violence, President Trump actually is there visiting at the moment. And he stated that he thinks the press is fueling the riots more so than Biden. Why? Because Biden doesn't even know he's alive. As Commander-in-Chief, President Trump is currently traveling in Kenosha, Wisconsin after the week of leftist riots and looting. And unfortunately, Wisconsin Democrat Governor Tony Evers sat back and allowed Kenosha to be looted and destroyed. Now, Evers does not want President Trump to come to Kenosha, but as he's the president of these entire United States, he does not have a say. He doesn't want national attention on the destruction of the far left and their rioters there in his state of Wisconsin. The fact is, the Democrats don't do anything about the violence, and they are smart enough to know they should be ashamed of their supporters' destruction. President Trump had this to say. He said, "These are anarchists. These are agitators. They're rioters. They're looters. They're bad people. They're burning down Portland." You take a look at that. You take a look at the scenes last night, and then the fake news media will say that they're friendly protesters. Because you people, I tell you, if we only had an honest press in this country, we would be much more advanced. But we have a very dishonest press. You don't report that. They shot a man in the street. They executed a religious man in the street, and you don't mention it. It's not even a story. You talk about other things. The press should be ashamed of themselves. I think the press, the media, is what's fueling this, more so than even Biden, because Biden doesn't know he's alive. The press is really fueling this, and they're fueling it horribly. Now, due to the fact that the press refuses to highlight the young man gunned down on the streets of Portland, I want to make sure that you guys know his name. Aaron Danielson was his real name. He's also known as Jay Bishop. Now, the sister of his best friend reached out to me to let me know that they all watch my show on a daily basis and that Jay himself was a dedicated viewer. And I think it's disgusting that the press wants to act like this just never even happened. They want to brush this under the rug and they want to make it look like this man was some type of radical. But he is not a white supremacist. He was not a violent man, and he was never someone who was involved in the violence that we see every day on the streets of Portland. Now, Jay was guilty of nothing more than being a supporter of President Trump and being there for the Patriot Prayer demonstration that was a counter demonstration to the rioting taking place in Portland. He was walking down the street with his friend. I believe he was riding his skateboard, and the man who gunned him down walked by and opened fire at close range. Now, in the videos and photos that have emerged, I'm not going to show them here out of respect for the family. It shows a person running up to Danielson and referring to him as Jay. Now, confusion erupted over social media because of the different names. However, he's referred to as Aaron J. Danielson in a family-approved GoFundMe, and as Jay by a friend in a graphic video at the scene. Now, a tweet shared by President Trump in an Oregon newspaper referred to Jay as Jay Bishop, and some on social media claimed he used that as a pseudonym to protect himself from the radicals there in Portland, although that has not been confirmed. Now, what's also happening is that people are sharing the criminal history of a different person named Jay Bishop, but that is not the man who died. There's also been a fake GoFundMe set up in Jay Bishop's name, but that has been taken down, and of course that has confused people even more. I just want everybody to keep Jay and his family in your prayers. This is definitely a story that is not getting enough attention, and I guarantee you that as more information becomes available, I will continue to report on it. He deserves to be remembered, he deserves our respect, and the shooter deserves the justice that is coming to him either now or in the next life. Now, despite the fact that Governor Evers does not want President Trump in Kenosha, despite the fact that he has allowed Kenosha to devolve into a terrible situation for the residents and business owners, President Trump made that trip today, and he made the announcement that the federal government is going to be providing assistance. First off, $1 million to Kenosha police, defund that. $4 million to support small businesses affected by the riots, and $42 million to support public safety in the state of Wisconsin. Let's go ahead and take a listen to President Trump's statement.
I'm committed to helping Kenosha rebuild. We all are. We will provide $1 million to the Kenosha law enforcement so that you have some extra money to go out and do what you have to do. You took it was a rough week, to put it mildly, and you've done it incredibly well. I'm also providing nearly $4 million to support these small businesses that I talked about today that got burned up, burned down. And we're going to be providing over $42 million to support public safety statewide, including direct support
for law enforcement and funding for additional prosecutors to punish criminals and resources to provide services to victims of crime. And that was Bill Barr wanted that money put in. So that's $42 million. That'll help with prosecutors and all of the other things that are so important to you. You need.
Right there on screen, President Trump, Attorney General Bill Barr, and DHS Secretary Chad Wolf. This right here is the trifecta of law and order coming back to the state of Wisconsin. Now, there is pretty clear evidence on display in all of these Democrat-run cities. When you remove money from law enforcement, when you handicap law enforcement and tell them not to enforce the law, crime is going to increase, and the only people that are going to suffer are the voters of that city or that state. President Trump making a definitive statement here, offering this money to the state of Wisconsin and to the law enforcement officials of Kenosha. There is only one way to solve this issue, and it is by restoring law and order. It looks like Oregon Governor Kate Brown has awoken to the issues in her state a little bit too late. Just recently, last week, she put out a statement saying that the violence and lawlessness needed to stop, and she put out a statement earlier today talking about what she plans to do about it. Well, the sheriffs of Oregon are not having any of it. They are defying this order by Governor Kate Brown to send deputies to Portland so that they can be attacked by protesters and harassed by the courts. They are not going for it. On Sunday, Oregon Governor Kate Brown requested Oregon sheriffs send their deputies to Portland to be sacrificial lambs for the violent far-left protesters and abusive liberal courts. She and Mayor Ted Wheeler have repeatedly denied offers from President Trump to send in the National Guard to solve the problem in a few hours. They would rather see their cities completely destroyed before they take any offer that President Trump has to make. They are committed U.S. progressives, crazy, arrogant, and very, very dangerous. The governor only made the request after Trump supporter and Patriot Prayer member Jay Danielson was gunned down in cold blood Saturday night by a far-left activist. And on Monday, in response, the Oregon sheriffs told Kate Brown to go pound sand. Sheriff Craig Roberts, the sheriff for Clackamas County, said the governor did not even bother to call him, and he said he will not be sending his deputies into the progressive cesspool. Sheriff Pat Garrett from Washington County said he, too, will not be sending his deputies to Portland. This right here essentially forcing Governor Kate Brown to call in the National Guard if she wants to quell the violence that she herself has allowed to fester over the last several months. In a recent report from the New York Post, we learned about the voter fraud operation that is in play by the Democrats. A Democrat operative actually blew the whistle on the massive mail-in voter fraud that is likely to take place in November if things are allowed to continue at their current rate. Now, this Democrat operative, who worked covertly in a massive voter fraud operation, blew the whistle to John Levine, the reporter at the New York Post, and he revealed how Democrats will try to steal the 2020 election with their mail-in voter scheme, which explains why they have been trying so hard to push the mail-in voter narrative for the entire country. Now, the insider revealed how Democrats rig elections by paying homeless voters, taking advantage of elderly in nursing homes, fraudulently posing as registered voters, printing up phony ballots, and even removing real ballots from their envelopes and replacing them with counterfeit ballots. The Democrat media complex is keeping CV-19 in the news cycle so they can push for mail-in ballots instead of voting in person for the 2020 election. And the insider who spoke with Levine on the condition of anonymity said fraud is more the rule than the exception. This is a real thing, the insider said, and there's going to be an effing war coming November 3rd over this stuff. If they knew how the sausage was made, they could fix it. The whistleblower is a Bernie Sanders supporter who has been working in a massive vote fraud operation for decades. Now, this insider clearly fears prosecution, and he said that his dirty work has taken him through the weeds of municipal and federal elections in Patterson, Atlantic City, Camden, Newark, Hoboken, and Hudson County, and his fingerprints can be found in local legislative, mayoral, and congressional races across the Garden State. Some of the biggest names and highest office holders in New Jersey have benefited benefited from his tricks, according to campaign records the Post actually reviewed. An election that is swayed by 500 votes, 1,000 votes, it can make a difference. It could be enough to flip states. Now, the whistleblower, whose identity, rap sheet, and long history working as a consultant to various campaigns were all confirmed by the Post, said he has not only changed ballots himself over the years, but led teams of fraudsters and mentored at least 20 operatives in New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania, which happens to be a critical 2020 swing state. Mail-in voting can be complicated, tough enough that 84,000 New Yorkers had their mail votes thrown out in the June 23rd Democratic presidential primary for incorrectly filling them out. But for political pros, they're a piece of cake. In New Jersey, for example, it begins with a blank mail-in ballot delivered to a registered voter in a large envelope. Inside the packet is a return envelope, a certificate of mail-in voter which the voter must sign, and the ballot itself. Now, the insider explained to Levine how he and his fellow operatives make phony mail-in ballots by running ballots through a copy machine. There's no watermark or stamp on the ballots, and the return envelopes are impossible to recreate, so they must be collected. And then his staff got to work tampering with the envelopes. The operatives would knock on doors and collect completed ballots by convincing voters they would mail them in on their behalf. The operatives would then take the sealed envelopes and hold them over boiling water. You have to steam it to loosen the glue, he said. Then they would remove the ballots and replace them with the counterfeit ballot and reseal the envelope. The whistleblower told Levine that sometimes postal employees are in on the scam. He said you have a postman who's a rabid anti-Trump guy and he's working in Bedminster or some Republican stronghold. He can take those filled out ballots, and knowing 95% of them are going to be Republican, he can just throw them in the garbage. And in some cases, mail carriers were member of his work crew, and they would sift ballots from the mail and then hand them over to the operative. The Democrat operatives would go into nursing homes and take advantage of the elderly. He said sometimes the nurses working inside the elder care facilities are paid operatives, and then they help the elderly with their absentee ballots and literally fill them out for them. They said they would also impersonate voters in states that do not require ID by targeting registered voters who usually skip presidential elections by using publicly available information. They would fill out index cards with those persons' names and districts and then go to their city and say, "You're going to be him, you're going to be him," and then go to the ballot box and simply impersonate them. At the polling place, the fake voter would sign in, get in line, and vote. And then they would simply forge the signature that already appears in the voter roll as best they could. In rare instances that a real voter had already signed in and cast a ballot, the impersonator would just chalk it up to an innocent mistake and bolt. They also said the homeless are a pool of reliable, buyable voters. With mail-in ballots, partisans from both parties hash out and count ballots at the local board of elections, debating which ballots make the cut and which need to be thrown out because of irregularities. They said any ballots offered up by him and his operation would come with a bent corner along the voter certificate, which indicates the voter signature. So Democrat Board of Election counters would know to fix it and not to object. It doesn't stay bent, but you can tell it's been bent, the tipster said. Until that certificate is approved, the ballot doesn't matter. They don't get to see the ballot unless they approve the certificate. I invented bending corners, the insider boasted, saying once the fixed ballots were mixed in with the normal ones, the bed was made. Once a ballot is open, it's an anonymous ballot. This Democrat insider just revealed precisely why the entire Democrat media apparatus is pushing for universal mail-in ballots and illegal ballot harvesting for the general election. Now, if we thought it was bad before, guys, this spells out just exactly how bad it is. This is not a select group of people which are fraudulently allowing votes to get through. This is a major operation of Democrat operatives who are specifically seeking the ability to defraud the system and to disenfranchise American voters of their right to cast a ballot for the person they want to elect. It's no wonder that President Trump is calling the alarm bells on voter fraud, and it's no wonder the Democrats want it pushed through so badly. And finally, the State Department is set to release memos which detail illegal social media monitoring of Americans. These are memos that are going to be released under FOIA, and they show that the social media of Fox News personalities Ingram, Hannity, and Dobbs, as well as the president's son, Don Jr., were all monitored. Now, the State Department has agreed to release these memos showing that its officials in the Kiev embassy, that would be Ukraine, illegally monitored 13 American social media accounts during the last year's Ukraine scandal, including President Trump's eldest son, Don Jr., and the aforementioned Fox News personalities Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, and Lou Dobbs. Now, these memos are being turned over to the conservative watchdog group Judicial Watch under the Freedom of Information Act, and they show that the U.S. Embassy in Kiev, under then Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch, you've heard that name before, began monitoring the social media accounts of the targets in March of 2019, as early stories about the embassy's activities and Joe Biden's son Hunter emerged at The Hill and on Fox News. John Solomon, the reporter writing this article, was actually one of the 13 individuals on the list who were targeted. Now, the embassy sought the help from the State Department in Washington to use a contractor called CrowdTangle to continue the social media monitoring, and it was advised the activities were barred by federal law. The embassy ceased the activities at that time and asked for training about the issue. Now, while the released documents have some information redacted, they will identify the 13 Americans whose accounts were targeted and that some officials were aware of the monitoring. Now, in addition to those Fox News hosts, John Solomon and the president's son, other figures whose social media were targeted include Trump lawyer and former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani, Judicial Watch president himself Tom Fitton, radio host and former Trump White House advisor Sebastian Gorka, One America News personality Jack Posobiec, and Fox News personalities Sarah Carter and Dan Bongino. Now, I'm sure that everyone remembers the posts from our favorite Anon talking about this very thing, the monitoring of reporters' communications and social media profiles. This is huge news, and it shows that Marie Yovanovitch and the Kiev embassy there in Ukraine was 100% dirty. And it's no wonder that pretty much every single witness which came out against President Trump during the impeachment hearings were directly related to Ukraine and the Kiev embassy. Well, guys, it looks like we have yet another proof that we can add to the list. How would our favorite Anon have known that Sarah Carter and John Solomon were under surveillance, or that that surveillance had ended? I think the answer to that question is extremely clear. It's because the individual or group of individuals behind the posts on the boards are truly part of military intelligence and are working with the administration to make sure President Trump is not removed in a coup fitting of a banana republic. As always, this has been Red Pill 78. I am Zak the Corruption Detector, and this was another edition of Red Pill News. Good luck, everyone, and God bless. Hey guys, one more thing. I just want to thank everyone for watching today. If you have not subscribed yet, I urge you to please consider subscribing. There will be a couple of videos that pop up if you want to continue to watch. There's also some ways in the description of this video that you can follow me on other platforms. Please consider doing that as well. And if you want to support the program directly, there are means to do that below as well. Thank you all for your support over the last couple of years. Consider liking and sharing this video and help me get the real news to people who don't yet know they've been lied to.